On the day of my husband's funeral, our son Nathan called me and said, "I'm going to Vanessa's birthday party instead. Dad's gone, Mom. Me showing up won't change anything. Stop being so dramatic." Then he hung up on me. What I discovered in his father's will proved that even dead, Richard knew our son better than I did. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. This story gets absolutely wild. I stood there in my black dress, holding my phone, staring at Richard's empty chair at the breakfast table. The same chair where he'd eaten his oatmeal every morning for 32 years. Now I was supposed to bury him while his only son was somewhere in Miami conducting grief counseling with champagne and a yacht. The doorbell started ringing at 9 a.m. First the florists, then the caterers, then Richard's business associates arriving early to pay their respects. Our house filled with the kind of people who'd known Nathan since he was in diapers. The same people who'd spend the entire day asking me the one question that would slowly drive me insane. "Where's Nathan?" I had my answer prepared. "He's processing his grief privately," which was technically true if you considered poolside mimosas and Instagram stories a form of mourning ritual. By noon, 300 people had gathered in our backyard. The governor came, Richard's college roommate who now ran the biggest bank in the state, even our old pastor who'd driven 2 hours just to say goodbye. Everyone who mattered was there. Well, almost everyone. I spent the entire service watching people scan the crowd, looking for the tall, dark-haired young man who should have been standing beside me, the son who was supposed to carry on Richard's legacy, the heir everyone expected to see graciously accepting condolences and discussing the future of the family business. Instead, I got to perfect my performance of Where's Nathan, a one-woman show I performed approximately 53 times that day. By the final act, I'd mastered the art of looking dignified while explaining that my son was too busy celebrating his girlfriend's birthday to attend his father's burial. But here's what nobody knew. While Nathan was posting party photos with champagne emojis, Richard had left me a letter that would change everything. A letter that proved my husband had been watching our son's transformation with the same growing horror I'd been trying to ignore. And by the time I finished reading that letter, I knew Nathan was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his entitled life. Let me tell you how we got here, because Nathan wasn't always a walking disappointment. 2 years ago, my son actually returned my phone calls. He showed up for Sunday dinners without negotiating payment. He even pretended to care about learning the family business that Richard had spent 40 years building from absolutely nothing. Then Vanessa Hart happened to him like a perfectly manicured natural disaster. I'll never forget our first meeting. She walked into my house wearing a white dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, looked around our 12-bedroom, Architectural Digest featured home, and said, "What a cute little cottage. Very rustic. I decided right then that this girl had either never seen a dictionary or had nerves of pure steel. Probably both, considering she was dating my son for his inheritance potential. But Nathan just stood there grinning like she'd announced his Nobel Prize nomination. That's when I knew we were dealing with a professional. Richard was more direct in his assessment. After they left that first dinner, he turned to me and said, "That girl counted the silverware, Margaret. I watched her do it twice." He was right. Within 6 months, Nathan had moved out of his perfectly nice apartment and into a downtown penthouse that Vanessa had somehow discovered during one of their romantic walks. Within a year, he was asking Richard for business loans to fund ventures that made about as much sense as opening an ice cream shop in Antarctica. First, it was a food truck specializing in organic acai bowls in Minnesota, in winter. Because apparently, Nathan thought Minnesotans were just dying to eat frozen fruit during snowstorms. That brilliant venture lasted exactly 3 months before Nathan came home asking for money to pivot the business model, corporate speak, for admit this was insane. Then came the cryptocurrency trading phase, which went about as well as you'd expect from someone who still asked me to help him understand his credit card statements. The grand finale was a partnership with his college roommate to flip houses, right before said roommate disappeared with $60,000 and left Nathan holding contracts written in what might as well have been ancient Sanskrit. Each time Nathan failed spectacularly, Richard would give him the lecture about hard work and responsibility. And each time, Vanessa would roll her eyes and whisper something in Nathan's ear that made him look at his father like Richard was some old fool who'd gotten lucky with real estate and stumbled into success. "Your dad doesn't understand modern business," she'd say, just loud enough for me to hear. He's stuck in the past. The past that had made our family wealthy enough for Nathan to lose $60,000 on imaginary house flips and still have dinner on the table. The worst part was watching my son transform from someone who used to ask Richard's advice about everything to someone who openly questioned every decision his father made, usually with Vanessa nodding encouragingly in the background like some kind of ambitious cheerleader. "Maybe it's time for fresh blood in the company," Nathan said during our last family dinner together. "Someone who understands social media and digital marketing." Richard looked at him steadily. "Son, show me you can successfully run a lemonade stand before you start redesigning a 40-year-old company." Nathan's face went red. Vanessa smirked. And that was the last time Nathan bothered showing up for Sunday dinner. Until today, when he couldn't even bother showing up for his father's funeral. But as I watched Richard's friends and colleagues fill our house with flowers and condolences, I had no idea that Nathan had just made the biggest mistake of his entitled life. The funeral was a masterclass in public humiliation disguised as a memorial service. Every conversation followed the exact same script. "Margaret, I'm so sorry for your loss. Richard was an extraordinary man. Thank you. That's very kind. Where's Nathan? I haven't seen him yet. He's processing his grief privately." Awkward pause. Concerned look. "Oh, well, please give him our condolences." By the third hour, I was seriously considering having business cards printed. "Nathan Blake regrets he cannot attend his father's funeral due to prior champagne commitments. Please direct all sympathy to his Instagram account." The pastor delivered a beautiful eulogy about Richard's dedication to family values and building a lasting legacy. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, especially since the family's designated legacy carrier was currently posting Instagram stories from what appeared to be a floating bar somewhere in international waters. I checked my phone during the reception and found Nathan's latest masterpiece, a video of him and Vanessa clinking glasses while Good Times played in the background. The caption read, "Life's too short not to celebrate the people you love. Happy birthday to my queen. Birthday queen. Living our best life. Blessed." Posted 47 minutes ago, right around the time we were lowering his father into the ground. Because apparently Nathan's grief processing required a soundtrack and hashtags. I turned off my phone and pasted my smile back on just as David Caldwell approached me. David had been Richard's business partner for 15 years, a solid, dependable man who'd always treated me like an actual human being instead of just Richard's wife who doesn't understand business. "Margaret, I can't imagine how difficult this must be, and I don't want to add to your stress, but we should probably discuss Richard's business affairs soon." "Of course. Maybe next week when things settle down?" "Absolutely. And Margaret?" He lowered his voice. "I know Nathan's having a hard time processing this loss. When he's ready to step into his role at the company, I'm here to help however I can." Nathan's role. The son who couldn't be bothered to show up for his father's burial was going to take over a multi-million-dollar business. That seemed about right for the boy who'd lost $60,000 on houses that never existed. After the last guests left, I found myself standing in Richard's study, surrounded by 40 years of awards and family photos. Everything he'd built, everything he'd hoped to pass down to the next generation of Blakes. The phone rang. I knew who it was before I answered. "Mom, how did everything go? I'm really sorry I couldn't be there. But Vanessa's entire family flew in from California, and it would have been incredibly rude to just abandon her on her birthday." "Nathan," my voice came out surprisingly steady. "Your father was buried today." "I know that. Look, I'm grieving too, okay? I just process things differently. I don't need some big ceremony with a bunch of people I barely know to remember Dad. 300 people came to honor your father. 300 people who loved and respected him, and every single one asked me where you were. What did you tell them?" "I told them you were processing your grief privately. I didn't mention the yacht or the champagne or the fact that you posted a party video while we were saying goodbye to your father." There was a pause. Then Vanessa's voice in the background. "Tell her we'll deal with all the legal stuff when we get back. No point making emotional decisions about money. Deal with the legal stuff." Like his father's death was just paperwork that needed filing, and his inheritance was already guaranteed. "We'll be home Tuesday," Nathan said. "We can sort everything out then." He hung up before I could respond. I sat in Richard's chair and stared at the family photo on his desk. Nathan at 16. Still smiling. Still the son we thought we'd raised. That boy was gone. But what I didn't know yet was that Richard had seen his disappearance coming long before I had, and he'd done something about it that would change everything. Nathan and Vanessa returned from Miami Tuesday evening, both sporting impressive tans and the kind of relaxed expressions that come from spending a week drinking champagne while other people bury your relatives. Their grief processing had clearly been very thorough and remarkably photogenic. "The house feels so empty without Dad," Nathan said as they walked through the front door, though he seemed more focused on checking his phone than absorbing any profound grief. Vanessa looked around the foyer like she was already mentally measuring for new furniture. "It's going to need some serious updating once we move in. Maybe something more contemporary, less old person chic. Once we move in." I'd been wondering when that particular shoe would drop, and apparently it was dropping with the subtlety of a piano falling from a third-story window. Over dinner, Wednesday night, they laid out their plans for my future with the casual confidence of people who'd clearly spent their vacation discussing my expiration date. Nathan thought I should consider a nice condo somewhere. "Something smaller, Mom. More manageable for someone your age." Vanessa suggested I might enjoy a retirement community. "They have activities and scheduled meals. You'd make so many friends." They talked about renovating the house like I was already dead, discussing kitchen updates and bathroom renovations while I sat there wondering if they'd forgotten I was still breathing and legally owned everything they were redesigning. "What about the business?" I asked, mostly to see how far their planning had progressed. Nathan perked up like I'd just asked about his favorite hobby. "I've been thinking about that. Dad was brilliant, obviously, but his approach was pretty outdated. I want to bring the company into the digital age. Social media marketing, influencer partnerships, maybe even some cryptocurrency investments. The same cryptocurrency investments that had cost him $40,000 6 months ago, but apparently failure was just another word for experience in Nathan's business dictionary. And Vanessa has some incredible ideas about modernizing our brand image," Nathan continued enthusiastically. "She has a degree in communications, from a college that accepted anyone with a pulse and a credit card. But I kept that observation to myself. No point spoiling their professional planning session." "Have you discussed any of this with David?" I asked. "David's a nice guy, but he's old school like Dad was. I think it might be time for some changes in leadership. Fresh perspectives, you know?" Vanessa nodded enthusiastically. "Nathan's going to revolutionize everything. Your husband built a solid foundation, but it takes innovative thinking to really maximize potential in today's market." Your husband. Not Richard or Nathan's father, just your husband, like he'd been some stranger who'd inconveniently died and left us his stuff to sort through. The reading of the will was scheduled for Thursday. Nathan spent Wednesday researching luxury cars online while Vanessa browsed real estate websites, looking at investment properties they could purchase once their windfall arrived. It was like watching two kids plan their Christmas morning, except the presents belonged to someone who'd been dead for less than a week. Thursday morning, Nathan put on his best suit, the one Richard had bought him for job interviews he'd never bothered attending. Vanessa wore a black dress that somehow managed to look both funeral-appropriate and celebratory, which was either impressive fashion sense or deeply disturbing psychology. "I'm nervous," Nathan admitted as we drove to the lawyer's office. "It feels so final, you know? Like Dad's really gone." It was the most human thing he'd said in 2 years. For just a moment, I saw a flash of the son I used to know. Then Vanessa reached over and squeezed his hand. "Baby, your father would want you to be happy. He'd want you to build something amazing with what he left you." And just like that, the moment was gone, replaced by Nathan's excited smile as he contemplated building something amazing with his dead father's money. The law offices of Brennan and Associates occupied the top floor of a downtown building that Richard had helped finance 20 years earlier. Mr. Brennan himself handled all of Richard's legal affairs, a distinguished man in his 70s who'd been drawing up contracts since before Nathan learned to tie his shoes. We sat in his conference room overlooking the city, Nathan practically vibrating with excitement while Vanessa checked her makeup in her phone camera. David Caldwell was there too, looking formal and slightly uncomfortable in his navy suit. "Before we begin," Mr. Brennan said, adjusting his glasses with deliberate precision, "I want to express my condolences again. Richard was not only a client, but a friend, and his loss leaves a significant void in our business community." Nathan nodded impatiently. "Thank you. Whenever you're ready to start." Mr. Brennan opened the file with the slow deliberation of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. "This is the last will and testament of Richard James Blake, updated and notarized 6 weeks before his death." 6 weeks. Something cold and sharp settled in my chest. Richard had changed his will 6 weeks ago and never mentioned it to me. That seemed like the kind of thing spouses usually discussed. "To my beloved wife Margaret," Mr. Brennan read, "I leave my eternal gratitude for 32 years of love, patience, and partnership. You have been the foundation upon which everything good in my life was built." Nathan shifted in his seat, clearly wondering why this was taking so long when they could just cut to the inheritance distribution and get on with their lives. "To my son Nathan," Mr. Brennan continued, "I leave my hope that you will someday understand the difference between earning something and expecting it, between building a legacy and inheriting one." The room went quiet. That definitely didn't sound like the beginning of a generous inheritance speech. "After careful consideration and much prayer, I am leaving my entire estate, including all properties, business interests, and financial assets, to my wife, Margaret Blake, with complete confidence in her wisdom and judgment." You could have heard a pin drop. Nathan's face went through about 6 different expressions in 3 seconds, like he was trying to process a foreign language, or math. Both had always been challenging for him. "However," Mr. Brennan continued, "I understand that Margaret may wish to provide for our son according to her own discretion and timeline. Therefore, any decisions regarding Nathan's inheritance will be left entirely to Margaret's judgment." Nathan looked like someone had just explained that Santa Claus wasn't real, and also he owed back taxes. "What does that mean exactly?" Mr. Brennan looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "It means your mother now controls everything your father owned. She can choose to share it with you or not. The decision is completely hers." Vanessa's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to catch flies. David was staring at his hands like they contained the secrets of the universe, and Nathan was looking at me like I'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. "Mom?" His voice cracked like he was 12 years old again. We'll figure this out, right? Dad probably just wanted to make sure you were taken care of first. That makes sense, right?" I looked at my son, this man who'd skipped his father's funeral to attend a birthday party, who'd spent 2 years treating our family like a personal ATM, who'd brought his gold-digging girlfriend to plan their future in my house the day after we buried his father. "I need time to think about it," I said quietly. And for the first time in 2 years, Nathan looked genuinely terrified. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Nathan gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing anchoring him to reality. Vanessa stared out the passenger window in complete silence, which might have been the first time since I'd met her that she wasn't calculating something out loud. When we pulled into the driveway, she finally exploded like a pressure cooker that had reached its limit. "This is completely insane. What kind of father does that to his own son? There has to be some kind of legal challenge we can make, or maybe the will is invalid, or—" "Vanessa." Nathan's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Stop." She whirled on him like a tornado changing direction. "Stop? Nathan, we're talking about millions of dollars, your inheritance, our future." "It's not our future," he said quietly. And for the first time since I'd known him, Nathan sounded like Richard. "It never was our future. It was always Dad's money." I got out of the car and walked toward the house, leaving them to their reality check. Inside, I went straight to Richard's study and sat in his chair, trying to process what had just happened. Richard had left me everything. More than that, he'd given me the power to decide what Nathan deserved. The weight of that responsibility felt like trying to lift a mountain with my bare hands. I opened the desk drawer where Richard kept his personal papers and found an envelope with my name on it in his familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. "My dearest Margaret," it began. "If you're reading this, then you know about the will, and you're probably wondering if I've lost my mind. The truth is, I've been watching our son for the past 2 years, and I've seen him become someone I don't recognize. Someone who values money more than family, who treats you with casual disrespect, and who has chosen a partner who sees us only as a source of wealth. I had to stop reading for a moment. Richard had seen it all, understood it all, and never said a word to me about how much it was hurting him. I know this puts you in an impossible position, the letter continued. You've always been the heart of this family, the one who believed in forgiveness and second chances. If Nathan can prove himself worthy of this inheritance, I trust you to recognize it. And if he can't, well, at least the choice will be yours, not mine. I've watched him break your heart too many times. I won't let him break your future too. The letter was signed, "All my love and complete confidence, Richard." I was still holding the letter when Nathan knocked on the study door. "Mom, can we talk? Alone?" I folded the letter and put it away. "Come in." He entered without Vanessa, which was encouraging. He looked younger somehow, uncertain in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager, asking permission to take the car. "I owe you the biggest apology of my life," he said, sitting across from the desk. "I've been a terrible son. Missing Dad's funeral was unforgivable. It was what I'd wanted to hear for 2 years. So why did it feel as empty as a campaign promise?" "Go on," I said. "I know I've made mistakes, the business failures, the attitude, letting Vanessa influence how I treated you and Dad. But I want to change. I want to be the son you both deserved." He looked so sincere sitting there, like a defendant pleading for mercy. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to forgive everything and pretend the last 2 years had been a bad dream we could all wake up from. "What about Vanessa?" I asked. Nathan hesitated, and in that hesitation, I heard everything I needed to know. "What about her?" "She's been planning your inheritance since the day I met her. She referred to your father as your husband, like he was some stranger who'd inconveniently died and left us paperwork to sort through." "She didn't mean it like that," he said, but he couldn't look me in the eye. But we both knew she had meant it exactly like that. "I need time to think," I told him. "This is the biggest decision I've ever had to make." "Of course, take all the time you need." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "But Mom, I really am sorry about everything." After he left, I sat alone in Richard's study until long after the sun went down. I thought about the little boy who used to help me bake cookies and bring me dandelions from the garden. I thought about the teenager who'd cried when his goldfish died. I thought about the young man who'd been so excited to learn about his father's business. And I thought about the man who'd hung up on me when I'd begged him to come to his father's funeral. By morning, I knew what I had to do, and it wasn't going to make anyone happy except Richard's memory. I asked Nathan to come to the house the next day, alone. When he arrived, I was waiting in the living room with Richard's old wooden jewelry box on the coffee table. "Where's Vanessa?" I asked. "She's taking some space to process everything. She thought this should be between family." That was probably the smartest decision she'd made since I'd met her, though I suspected it had less to do with respect and more to do with not wanting to witness potential bad news firsthand. Nathan sat across from me, eyeing the wooden box with the desperate hope of someone buying a lottery ticket. "Your father left you something specific," I said. "Something he wanted you to have regardless of any other decisions about the inheritance." His face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? What is it?" I handed him the box. He opened it carefully with the reverence of someone handling ancient artifacts, and I watched his expression shift from excitement to confusion to dawning horror. Inside was Richard's old Timex watch, not his expensive Rolex or the gold anniversary watch I'd given him for our 20th wedding anniversary. The $20 Timex he'd worn when we were first married, when we had nothing but dreams, determination, and a shared checking account with 2 digits. "I don't understand," Nathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your father wore that watch every day for the first 10 years of our marriage. When he was building the business from nothing, when we couldn't afford to eat out, when every dollar mattered and every decision could make or break our future." Nathan lifted the watch carefully, like it might explode. There was an envelope underneath it. "Read the letter," I said. Nathan unfolded the paper with shaking hands. "Son, this watch represents the only time in my life when I truly understood the value of hard work and sacrifice, when I was building something instead of expecting it to be handed to me, when I earned every success through effort instead of inheritance. I hope someday you'll understand why this is more valuable than any amount of money I could give you." Nathan looked up at me with tears in his eyes and panic in his voice. "Mom, what are you saying?" I took a deep breath and delivered the words that would change both of our lives forever. "I'm saying that watch is your inheritance, Nathan. All of it." The hope died in his eyes so quickly it was almost violent. "You can't be serious." "I am completely serious." But I apologized. I said I wanted to change. I meant it. "You did say that, and maybe you even meant it. But Nathan, you missed your father's funeral to go to a party. You brought your girlfriend here the day after we buried him and let her plan your future like I was already dead and buried too." I said I was sorry. Sorry doesn't undo 2 years of selfishness. Sorry doesn't bring your father back to see the man you claim you want to become. And sorry doesn't prove that this isn't just another performance designed to get what you want. Nathan stood up abruptly, the watch clattering to the floor like a broken promise. "This is insane. You can't just cut me out of everything. I'm his son, and I'm his wife, the wife he trusted to make this decision when he could have left everything to you automatically." "Vanessa was right about you," Nathan said, his voice turning cold and ugly. "You're just a bitter old woman who can't stand that I found someone who actually loves me." And there it was, the real Nathan. The one who'd been hiding behind the apologies and promises, the entitled, angry man who'd been there all along. "Vanessa loves your trust fund," I said calmly. "When that's gone, we'll see how much she loves you." Nathan's face twisted with rage. "Fine, keep your money, but don't expect me to stick around and take care of you when you're old and alone in this house." He headed for the door, then turned back with the cruelest smile I'd ever seen on his face. "And don't expect me to come to your funeral either." The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows and probably wake the neighbors. I picked up the watch from where he'd dropped it and held it in my hands. Such a small thing to represent such a big lesson. But something told me this wasn't over. Nathan had never handled rejection well, even as a child. And now he had Vanessa whispering poison in his ear about lawsuits and legal challenges. I was right to be worried, but I was also right to prepare for what came next. For 3 weeks, I heard absolutely nothing from Nathan. No angry phone calls, no threatening texts, no dramatic visits with legal papers. It was like he'd vanished into thin air, which frankly was an improvement over his previous communication style. David Caldwell called occasionally to check on me and handle business decisions that couldn't wait. Richard's company was running smoothly despite the change in ownership, though David mentioned that Nathan had been asking questions around town about challenging wills and finding lawyers who specialized in inheritance disputes. "I don't think he has any legal grounds," David assured me during one of our weekly check-ins. "Richard's will is absolutely ironclad, and he was clearly of sound mind when he wrote it." "What about Vanessa? Is she still in the picture?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Actually, no. Someone saw Nathan at Murphy's Tavern downtown, alone. Apparently, Vanessa moved back in with her mother about a week after the will reading. Murphy's Tavern was a working-class bar where construction workers went to drink beer and complain about their day. Not exactly where I'd expected to find Richard Blake's son, but life had a way of teaching lessons, whether you wanted to learn them or not. Then, on a Thursday morning exactly 3 weeks after our confrontation, Nathan showed up at my door looking like he'd been living in his car. He was alone, which was encouraging. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unwashed, and something in his eyes looked fundamentally different. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly, without his usual entitled swagger. I stepped aside and let him into the foyer. We stood there awkwardly for a moment, two people who used to know how to talk to each other. "Vanessa left," he said finally, like he was announcing a death in the family. "I heard. I'm sorry." And surprisingly, I was. Not because I liked her, but because I could see the genuine pain in his eyes. Nathan's transformation was happening about as fast as his bank account emptying. "No, you're not." "Oh, and you shouldn't be. You were right about her. About everything." We moved to the living room, and Nathan collapsed onto the couch like someone had cut all his strings. "She dumped me 2 days after you gave me the watch. Said she couldn't be with someone who wasn't financially stable. Then she asked if I could loan her money for a security deposit on a new apartment. Despite everything, I felt a stab of sympathy for my son. Being abandoned by someone you love is devastating, even when that someone is terrible for you. I've been staying at the motel on 5th Street, he continued, trying to figure out what to do next. And I realized something important. What's that? I became everything Dad was afraid I'd become. Entitled, lazy, ungrateful. I let a woman I barely knew turn me against the people who actually loved me, and I was too selfish to see it happening. This felt different from his previous apology. Deeper somehow. More genuine. Like he'd actually spent time thinking, instead of just scrambling for the right words to get what he wanted. Nathan's sincerity had always been directly proportional to how much he needed something. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. "I got a job, waiting tables and washing dishes at Murphy's Tavern. It's not much, but it's honest work. And I found a studio apartment above the hardware store. Murphy's Tavern was where working people went to eat cheap food and drink cheaper beer." The fact that Nathan was willing to work there, to start over at the absolute bottom, suggested that maybe Vanessa's departure had knocked some sense into him. "Nathan, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," he interrupted with more conviction than I'd heard from him in years. "I need to figure out who I am when I'm not riding on Dad's success or spending his money. Maybe I should have done this a long time ago." He stood to leave, then hesitated at the door. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect money. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what Dad was trying to teach me." After he left, I sat in the living room thinking about second chances and whether people could really change, or if they just got better at pretending. Part of me wanted to believe Nathan's transformation was genuine. Part of me wondered if this was just another manipulation, more sophisticated than the others. I decided to wait and see. Time had a way of revealing people's true intentions. What I didn't know was that someone else had been watching our family drama unfold with great interest. Someone who saw opportunity in Nathan's desperation and my isolation. Someone I trusted completely, and that someone was about to make his move. Nathan had been working at Murphy's Tavern for 6 weeks when David Caldwell called with news that made my blood run cold. "Margaret, I need to talk to you about something urgent. Can you come to the office this afternoon?" David's office had always intimidated me slightly. Floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive furniture, walls covered with awards and photographs documenting Richard's business successes. David gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from his massive desk. But his usual warm smile was nowhere to be found. His concern for me was touching, almost as touching as his concern for my bank account. "I've been getting some very concerning phone calls," he said, without his usual pleasantries. "People asking questions about the company's financial health. Whether we're looking for new investors, that sort of thing." "Is that unusual?" I asked, though something in his tone was already making me nervous. "It is when they're asking specifically about you, about whether you're capable of handling Richard's responsibilities without making costly mistakes." Something cold and sharp settled in my stomach. "What kind of questions?" "Whether you understand the business well enough to make good decisions. Whether you might be interested in selling your shares to someone with more experience. Whether you're feeling overwhelmed by all the responsibility." David leaned forward, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. "Margaret, I think someone is testing the waters for a takeover attempt, and they're betting that you're an easy target because you don't have business experience." I thought about the past few weeks, the phone calls from financial advisors offering to help me optimize my investments. The man who'd approached me at the grocery store claiming to be a business consultant who could help me understand Richard's complex financial arrangements. The dinner invitation from people I'd never met who said they'd been friends of Richard's. I'd ignored it all, assuming it was normal vulture behavior that happened when wealthy people died. But now it felt more coordinated, more purposeful. "What should I do?" I asked, hating how helpless I sounded. "Be very careful about who you trust. Don't sign anything without calling me first." "And Margaret?" David hesitated, looking genuinely worried. "I hate to say this, but maybe it's time to consider bringing Nathan back into the family business. Not as an owner, but as someone who understands what's at stake. Nathan doesn't know anything about business." "No, but he knows people, and he might be able to spot threats that we can't see coming. Sometimes it takes family to protect family." That evening, Nathan arrived for what had become our weekly dinner. He looked better than he had in months, thinner, but stronger somehow. Working with his hands and supporting himself seemed to agree with him. "You look worried," he said as I let him in. Because apparently 6 weeks of actual work had sharpened his observation skills. Just a long day, I said, but over dinner I found myself watching his face carefully. 6 weeks of washing dishes and serving drinks had changed him. The soft, entitled look was completely gone. His hands had calluses now, and he talked about his co-workers like they were actual people instead of invisible service providers. "Nathan," I said as we cleared the table, "David thinks someone might be trying to pressure me into selling Dad's company." Nathan stopped loading the dishwasher and turned to face me. "That's not good. Dad always said the company was worth more intact than broken up. Someone tears it apart, they could make millions while destroying everything he built. Do you have any idea who might—" The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Through the window, I could see a familiar figure on the porch. Tom Morrison, one of Richard's oldest friends and occasional business partners. I opened the door with a smile, genuinely happy to see a friendly face. "Tom, what a nice surprise." Tom Morrison was a distinguished man in his 70s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed in the way that suggested old money and good breeding. He'd been at the funeral, had spoken beautifully about Richard's integrity and vision. His smile had all the warmth of a tax audit, though I didn't recognize that at the time. "Margaret, I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check on how you're managing." "Of course. Nathan's here for dinner. Would you like some coffee?" We settled in the living room, and Tom accepted his coffee with the warm, grandfatherly smile I remembered from years of company parties and charity events. "Margaret, I've been thinking about you quite a bit since Richard's passing. This must be such an overwhelming transition." "I'm managing," I said, though his concern felt genuine and comforting. "I'm sure you are. Richard always said you were stronger than you looked." Tom's expression grew more serious. "But I imagine the business side of things feels daunting. All those decisions, all that responsibility. David's been very helpful guiding me through everything. David's a good man, but he's not family. And frankly, Margaret, I've been hearing some concerns from Richard's other business associates about the company's direction under the current circumstances." Nathan had been quiet until now, but I saw him stiffen slightly. "What kind of concerns?" I asked. "Well, you know how the business world works. Richard was the driving force behind everything. Without his leadership, people start to worry about stability, about whether the company can maintain its competitive edge." Tom leaned forward with the expression of someone delivering difficult but necessary news. "Margaret, I've been talking to some very reputable investors who might be interested in taking this burden off your shoulders. They'd pay fair market value for your shares, and you could enjoy your retirement without all this stress." The coffee cup felt suddenly heavy in my hands. "That's very thoughtful, Tom, but I'm not interested in selling. I understand your hesitation, and I respect your loyalty to Richard's memory. But Margaret, be realistic about the situation. You've never been involved in day-to-day operations. The company needs experienced leadership, and frankly, it needs it soon. Every day you wait, the value decreases." Nathan stood up with the quick movement of someone who'd just recognized a threat. "Mr. Morrison, I think my mother's been pretty clear about her position." Tom's friendly expression faltered slightly, like a mask slipping. "Nathan, I heard about your situation with the inheritance. That must be difficult to process. Actually, it's been the best thing that ever happened to me." Tom looked between us, clearly recalculating his approach. "Well, perhaps you should think about my offer, Margaret. I'll call you in a few days to see if you've reconsidered." After he left, Nathan and I sat in silence for several minutes. "Mom," he said finally, "I think you just met your first vulture." And something told me Tom Morrison was just the beginning. I called David the next morning and told him about Tom Morrison's visit. There was a long, troubling pause on the other end of the line. "Margaret, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it. Tom's been calling the other partners too, asking detailed questions about our client contracts, our debt structure, whether we're vulnerable to acquisition." My stomach dropped. But he was Richard's friend. Richard's friend, not Richard's protector. And Margaret, there's something else. Tom's been asking specifically about Nathan, about his financial troubles, his failed businesses, whether he might be willing to pressure you into selling. The picture was becoming clearer and uglier. They thought Nathan would be their inside man. Exactly. They were counting on him being desperate and resentful enough to work against you. What they didn't count on was his actual transformation. That afternoon, Nathan showed up at the house still wearing his Murphy's Tavern uniform, smelling like French fries and determination. "I've been thinking about Tom Morrison's visit," he said. "These people are predators, Mom. They're going to keep circling until they find a weakness they can exploit." Nathan's eyes had taken on an intensity I hadn't seen since he was a child, planning elaborate schemes to avoid doing his homework. What if we gave them exactly what they're expecting to see? What if I played the part of the bitter, disinherited son who wants revenge against his mother? That sounds incredibly dangerous. It is dangerous. But it's also the only way we're going to find out exactly who's behind this and how far they're willing to go to steal Dad's company. I studied my son's face, seeing echoes of Richard's strategic thinking. Why would you do that? Why take the risk? Because for the first time in years, I feel like I'm actually useful to this family. Because Dad built something important, and I want to protect it. He paused, his voice becoming softer. And because I owe you both more than I can ever repay. The next day, Nathan called Tom Morrison and arranged to meet for lunch. He wore his most expensive clothes, remnants from his Vanessa days, and played his part with the skill of someone who'd spent years manipulating people to get what he wanted. "Mr. Morrison, I've been thinking about what you said to my mother, about the company needing experienced leadership." Tom's interest was immediate and predatory. "Go on." "I think she's in over her head. She won't admit it, but she's scared. She calls David constantly asking for advice about basic business decisions." Nathan was laying it on thick, but Tom was eating it up like free caviar at a charity auction. "That must be frustrating for you, watching someone else make choices about your family's legacy." "It is, especially when those decisions could destroy everything my father built." Nathan leaned forward conspiratorially. "Mr. Morrison, what if I told you I might be able to convince her to listen to reason? To seriously consider your investor's offer?" Tom's smile reminded me of a shark who'd just spotted wounded prey. "I'd say that would be very beneficial for everyone involved, including you, of course." They shook hands, and Nathan walked away feeling sick to his stomach. But he'd confirmed what we suspected. Tom Morrison was actively working to steal our company, and he thought Nathan would help him do it. Over the next week, Nathan fed Tom carefully crafted information about my supposed doubts and fears, while David and I worked with our lawyers to understand exactly what legal protections we had. But we were about to discover that Tom Morrison wasn't the real threat. He was just the visible part of a much more dangerous plan, orchestrated by someone I trusted completely, someone who'd been playing a much longer game than any of us realized. Everything fell apart on a Wednesday that started like any other day and ended with me questioning everything I thought I knew about loyalty and friendship. Nathan had been feeding information to Tom Morrison for 2 weeks, learning about the attempted takeover while we built legal protections around the company. It seemed like we were winning a game we barely understood. Then Nathan came home from his meeting with Tom, looking like he'd seen something that had fundamentally shaken his worldview. "Mom, we have a much bigger problem than Tom Morrison." He sat heavily at the kitchen table, still wearing his work clothes but looking older somehow, more serious than I'd seen him since Richard's death. "I was supposed to meet Tom at his office today, but when I got there, he wasn't alone. David was there. They were deep in conversation about finalizing the acquisition and making sure Margaret doesn't resist the transition." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What are you saying?" "David's been working with Tom from the beginning, Mom. He's been the one feeding them inside information about Dad's business, about our family situation, about how to approach you." I felt like the ground was shifting under my feet. "That can't be right. David's been helping me navigate everything since Richard died." "Think about it," Nathan said gently, and I could see he hated having to destroy my faith in someone I trusted. Who had complete access to all of Dad's financial information? Who knew exactly what to say to gain your trust? Who convinced you that the company needed protecting from outside threats while he was orchestrating those threats? The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. David had been the one suggesting I might need help managing the business. David had been the one warning me about vultures and takeover attempts. David had been positioning himself as my protector while setting me up for betrayal. "How long do you think this has been going on?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "I think David's been planning this since the day Dad died." Maybe longer. Maybe he always resented that Dad left everything to you instead of recognizing his partnership with equal ownership. That evening, David called to check on me, just like he had every week since Richard's funeral. But now his concern felt like a performance I'd been too naive to recognize. "Margaret, how are you holding up? I know managing the business must feel overwhelming sometimes." "I'm learning," I said, trying to keep my voice normal while my world collapsed around me. "I've been thinking more about those takeover concerns we discussed. Maybe we should consider some kind of partnership arrangement. Something that would give you security, but ensure the company has experienced leadership." Experienced leadership, meaning him. It was a smooth pitch, reasonable and protective, designed to make me feel grateful for his guidance while he stole everything Richard had built. "What kind of partnership?" I asked. "Well, you'd retain majority ownership, of course. But perhaps I could take on more operational control, handle the complex decisions that Richard used to make." "Let me think about it," I said. "Of course. But Margaret, we shouldn't wait too long. Every day we delay gives the real threats more time to organize." The real threats that he was coordinating. After I hung up, Nathan and I sat in Richard's study, planning our response to betrayal by someone I'd trusted completely. "We could confront him directly," Nathan suggested. "No," I said, feeling something cold and determined settling in my chest. "If we tip our hand too early, he'll just deny everything and disappear with whatever he's already stolen. We need proof." "Then what do you suggest?" I looked at Richard's photo on the desk, remembering his letter about trusting my judgment and protecting our family. "Tomorrow, I'm going to call David and tell him I've decided to accept his partnership proposal. I want to see exactly how far he's willing to go." "Mom, that's dangerous. So is doing nothing while he destroys everything your father built." The next evening, I called David and asked him to prepare a partnership agreement. He arrived at my house an hour later with contracts and a smile that no longer looked warm but calculating. "Margaret, I think you're making a very wise decision. This arrangement will protect you while ensuring the company remains strong and profitable." I pretended to read through the documents while David explained how our partnership would work. What he was proposing was essentially a complete transfer of control disguised as shared ownership, wrapped in language designed to make me feel protected while I signed away everything. "This looks very comprehensive," I said, "but I'd like my lawyer to review it before I sign anything." David's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, though I should mention, Margaret, that Tom Morrison's investment group is preparing their formal offer next week. If we're going to present a united front against outside threats, we should probably finalize our arrangement soon." There it was, the artificial deadline, the pressure to act quickly before I could think too clearly about what I was signing. "I understand completely. Let me have my lawyer look this over tonight, and I'll give you an answer tomorrow." After David left, Nathan and I called our lawyer and explained the entire situation. Within 2 hours, we had a plan that would either expose David's betrayal or prove our suspicions wrong. The next day, I called David and told him I was ready to sign the partnership agreement. We arranged to meet at his office that evening to finalize everything. But when I arrived, David wasn't alone. Tom Morrison was there, along with 2 other men I didn't recognize. "Margaret," David said with a smile that had lost all pretense of warmth, "I thought you should meet the other key players in our arrangement. This is James Garrett and Michael Stevens, our primary investors." I sat down and looked at the 4 men who'd been working together to steal my husband's company, while pretending to protect me from exactly the kind of people they were. "Gentlemen," I said calmly, placing my phone on the table with the recording app clearly visible, "I want you to know that this entire conversation is being documented." David's friendly expression vanished like smoke. "Margaret, what are you doing?" "I'm protecting myself from people who prey on widows. I'm documenting evidence of your conspiracy to defraud me out of everything my husband built while pretending to be my friend and advisor." David's mentorship had been so generous, almost as generous as his plans for my money. The silence in the room was deafening. "I know about your partnership with Tom's group. David, I know you've been feeding them inside information from the beginning. I know you've been creating artificial urgency and fake threats to pressure me into trusting you while you plan to steal everything." David looked between his conspirators, panic beginning to show in his carefully controlled expression. "And I know," I continued, standing up and gathering my purse, that Richard was right to trust me with his legacy instead of assuming his business partner would honor his memory. I walked toward the door, then turned back. You'll be hearing from my lawyers, gentlemen, all of you. As I left that office, I felt more powerful than I had since Richard died. But the real victory came 2 weeks later, when Nathan called me with news that made everything worthwhile. Mom, you're not going to believe this. David just offered to sell me his shares in the company for practically nothing. Apparently, the legal bills are mounting, and he needs cash desperately. What did you tell him? I told him I'd have to discuss it with my business partner. Your business partner? Yeah. Turns out there was a clause in Dad's will that we missed. If I could prove myself worthy of the family business through actions rather than words, then you had the discretion to bring me in as a junior partner. I smiled, remembering Richard's letter about trusting my judgment and believing in second chances. Well then, partner, I said, I think we should buy David out. Someone needs to teach him the difference between earning trust and exploiting it. 3 months later, Nathan and I were running Richard's company together. Nathan had learned more about business in 6 months of washing dishes than he'd learned in 2 years of expecting inheritance. And I'd discovered that I was much stronger and smarter than anyone, including myself, had ever imagined. Some stories end with revenge. This one ends with justice, redemption, and the discovery that the best inheritance isn't money. It's the wisdom to know who deserves your trust. And sometimes, that's worth more than all the money in the world. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.